Hi everyone, my name is Bailey Bryan, and for today's video discussion, I chose the article The Quaker Executions as Myth and History by Carla Pestana. In this article, she argues that the Quakers used the executions that took place in Boston from 1659 to 1661 as a way to rewrite history and to build up their own myths about the event, and in doing so, caused the Puritans to be viewed as this religiously intolerant group. She argues that as the Quaker faith became less radical, it needed to reconcile these very radical early Quakers with the newer pacifist group that was coming out. So they needed to use the execution victims as a way to create martyrs to make themselves look better. She argues that it was much harder for the Puritans to write their version of history because it was much harder for them to reconcile executions within their own history. She says, firstly, they tried to reconcile it as a religious issue. They argued that the Quakers were of the devil, and so they needed to protect the religious nature of their colony. Later on down the line, they had to make it a civil issue and saying that the Quakers threatened their civil government. She at one point says that the idea that the Puritans were religiously intolerant was a criticism that the Quakers largely invented themselves. I believe this is an unfair assessment of the Quakers and a rather harsh one at that. I don't believe it's something that is solely to blame on them or to lay at their feet. As Charles E. Park said in his article, Puritans and Quakers, groups, not only the Quakers, but groups like the Catholics and Anabaptists and other non-Puritan groups were not allowed in the colony as well. They were not allowed to practice their religion either. Now, the early Quakers were very aggressive and very pushy as far as what they believed, and so they could be considered very irritating. And so it's understandable why this group is often the one that is remembered, because they were probably the loudest of the dissenters. But I also think it's important to remember that the Quakers were not the only group that was being banished. And before this, the Puritans had a history of sending out even their own that they considered dissenters. As we learned in the documentary last week, Anne Hutchinson was sent out when she did not conform to the very strict Puritan ideals that were being put in place. As the documentary said, at the heart of the Puritan faith is this idea of giving authority back to the individual. But for the colony to function correctly, they needed this idea of conformity. And so people like Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams were sent out of the colony much earlier than the Quakers. And so I think to say that the Quakers are the only ones that have perpetuated this idea is false, because they were sending out their own that didn't fit into this very specific hierarchy or set of rules. And in Alan Taylor's book, American Colonies, he discusses how the Puritans, when they came to the colonies, they were creating a colony that was for other Puritans. They were leaving England because they weren't happy with the church there, and they were coming to create their own society in a way that would showcase Puritan ideals to England. And so they needed to have this very specific structure and very firm set of rules and guidelines, and that didn't involve other religions. It was a colony for Puritans by Puritans. And so I think to say that the Quakers are the only reason that we view the Puritans as religiously intolerant is false, because they were creating a society for other Puritans. They weren't creating a society for other religions, as like Pennsylvania would be later on down the line. So I think that she is making an unfairly harsh assessment of the Quakers. I don't believe it is strictly their fault that we view the Puritans as religiously intolerant, but I think that it is a mixture of ideas and reasons that we believe that they were religiously intolerant. So thank you.